Hi, beautiful souls. This is Sadhana, and welcome to my channel. This is the third in a series of videos about deck combinations, and today we're going to look at a very special use of deck combos for past life readings. And I have selected 6 different decks to share with you today to work with past life readings. And we're going to talk a little bit about, first of all, why do a past life reading and how a past life reading can be of help to you in your work towards healing and peace and just kind of finding your way back to your path. Whether you are pulling cards for yourself or you are a professional reader, hopefully you will get something from this video today. This is not a reading that I have been doing for a long time, and it has been requested over and over again by clients, and so it's really taken me some time to kind of find my way to this reading and to figure out why I'm even doing it in the first place. So I think that's a really important consideration. My first experience, and probably my most, maybe not first, but my most profound experience with past life readings was with one of my teachers who did I think she calls it a karmic soul reading, where she does light weaving and then goes into a semi-trance and receives messages from mostly Archangel Metatron to go back to a time where the most recent life where something happened to bring forth a theme, an issue that still is appearing in your life and still hasn't resolved. And so for my personal reading, it went back, I'm going to say at least 1,000 years. I mean, it's really hard to pin that down exactly, but it was definitely in ancient India. And so this theme, this recurring issue, for me has been going on for a very, very long time. And that was a really profound reading. When I started reading with these cards, the second reading I ever did for myself, the same story came up identically through the cards, and I may share that with you later, but it's kind of a personal story. We'll see how that goes with this today. So first of all, what decks have I pulled out here to share with you, and why these decks? Some of them will be more obvious than others, and these ones look really pretty, the colors on the back. Let's just start with that, but we're not choosing decks just because, you know, the backs look pretty. Let's start here. This is the Weaver's Oracle by Carolyn Hillier. I edged mine multiple colors, kind of some metallics and earthy colors. This is an extremely powerful deck for working with past life readings. These are a collection of paintings produced by Carolyn over 30 years. This is her life's work, basically. And these are so much more than paintings. Each of the objects in the cards was created for the painting, for the artwork. These artworks, I believe, were all life-size, so they were all like 6 to 8 feet high. They were huge masterpieces, really. There are hidden objects in many of the paintings, sometimes underneath the weaving or within the cloak of the woman. This is not just a deck for working with women. It does address the welcoming and the accessibility of the energy of this deck for masculine energy as well too. So this is a super powerful deck for working with past life readings or any kind of ancestor work that you're doing. This deck here is the Earth Power Oracle by Stacey DeMarco. And the reason that I like to use this deck is because it takes you to places on planet Earth where the veil is thinner. So there's certain places on the planet, and for sure not all of them are included in this deck, but there's the sense of magic is just easier to access. And many of you will have been to some of these sacred sites. And in the book, Stacey addresses the kind of energy present at these places. But the reason that I include these in a past life reading is it gives us a geographic location to connect your issue or your story or whatever you're working with. And I find it really helpful because sometimes if you've had past life meditation guidance, or you've done hypnosis, or you've had other readings, it can be really helpful to have a geographical location associated, or a culture associated with your past life reading. So this is a really nice deck to include here. Okay, I just want to make sure we give these all a good shuffle, because we're going to do some mini readings like we did in the other videos. Let's go down here. This is a tarot deck. Really, really pretty backs with these metallic bronze backs. This deck, I am actually waiting for the hardcover guidebook, which I believe is out of print, but I've ordered it because I wanted to explore this deck a little more deeply. This is the Labyrinth Tarot. And this, I was searching for a tarot deck that had sepia colors that seem to transcend time, and you know, it wasn't attached to a particular culture. One thing that with this deck that works really well is just to pull out the majors, because then only the majors are in sepia. By the way, the artist here is Royo. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to leave in the minors as well too. So the minors are color coded, the majors are in sepia, and it does seem to have a timeless quality to it. The minors are they're pips, so there's not a lot of illustrations there. So the quartz and the majors have more illustrations, are more illustrated. And when I've done readings and included the pip cards, it's been really helpful as well too. So we will, for today, include those. But yeah, this is the Labyrinth Tarot. And another thing you can see here is that so far these colorations work really well together. And I'm just going to give this a shuffle. As you're probably aware, color has frequency, color has energy. And so if I were to introduce to the reading a deck that had super bright colors or was not in kind of sync with what's going on here, to me, there's something about that that feels, I don't know, there's a different, a very different energy. Okay. The next deck I have here, this is, I believe, out of print. This is one of Doreen Virtue's decks. So this is the one she made with Brian Weiss called Past Lives. And I'm going to suggest some other decks that could be used instead of this one. I like the backs. I like the doors here. For those of you that have done past life meditation, or if you haven't done that before, guided meditation I'm talking about, often you are guided down, you're taken kind of through a garden, and then often you're taken down a tunnel or down a corridor or something like that. And then as you go down through the tunnel, the passage, there will be doors on either side. And then usually you're asked to open a door and walk through a door. And that's what this reminds me of. Now, these are very kind of typical. It's not the artwork I love on these cards. It is, there's some, what I want to say. Despite the lack of appeal artistically with these cards, I think there is some there's some real purpose for using these cards. So the concept of archetype, we need to talk about that just a little bit, because These issues that we're dealing with have usually, as I mentioned with my own personal story, have been with us for a long, long time. And sometimes they will appear through an archetype, and well, almost always. And an archetype we tend to think of as like as a role, like high priestess or spouse, or let's see, what else have we got here? Like knight. So knight might be a familiar archetype. But also, as one of the reasons I pulled in Stacey's deck was that we also need to be aware of geographic karma and connections with certain places on the planet. This deck has quite a few cards that deal with physical locations as well too, and I believe there's a galactic card. And then this is also really important. I love that this is included on this deck. I did a workshop with that same teacher that I mentioned, and during that workshop, the process was to go through a series of archetypes. I believe it was 9 or 10, and we did a releasing of vows. And the thinking behind this workshop is that over lifetimes we have all taken many, many different vows. One of the vows we may have taken was one of poverty. And if we have any connection with that, we need to kind of release that energy so we can move forward in this lifetime. It was a super powerful workshop. If you're interested in that kind of thing, let me know. I can send you a link. Let me give you another example of that. Okay. So, there may have been a vow that you made at some point to serve, in a military sense, unquestioningly to do exactly as you are told. You can kind of see how this might play out in your present life. And so the whole process of this workshop was renouncing all of these ties we have to things that have control over us. And it was a really beautiful process. And I've done this workshop a few times. And to tell you the truth, the first time I did it, I couldn't actually get through it. It was so powerful. And the second time was a little more gentle, but it was really, really something. So let's start with these 4 decks, and then I'm going to show you a couple other decks that might work as well too. All right, so let's do a couple of sample readings just to show you how I would work through this. And generally, this would not be a first reading for a client. I would have already worked with a client. Past life readings tend to be a little, they can be really profound, really, really deep. So I would suggest this would be, something that you would do with a client or somebody that you knew really well, or you kind of were aware of, not necessarily their issues, but you were really, sensitive to what was going on with them. So in the tarot, we have the Star, the King of Pentacles, and the Three of Pentacles. And then we have imprisonment or slavery, Mother of Time, and the Magnetic South Pole. Let's start with the Weaver's Oracle, and I'm going to refer to the guidebook. Number 2 stone, Mother of Time, is from the Guardian clan, and she is a South Weaver. So we're looking to the direction of the South and the lessons and the energy that reveals. I'm going to read you a little bit here from her yarn. There was one among their clan whose weaving threads had become as fragile as her bones. Her loom was wound with strands of silver, white, and gray. Its cloth had grown dry as lichen and thin as air. She was the oldest of them all, wise and sage, and great-grandmother of Time. She was known to those as Riven Ma, and that is how they sang to her whenever they stepped out of her old body to journey in the dreaming realms, so she might hear them and know how to return home. She sat opposite the threshold of the Heron house, close to the hearth, where she could warm her feet and maintain a good view of the women as they arrived or left that shrine. The story goes on, and what I have found with working with this deck is if you're reading the story to yourself or to a client, there's going to be a word or two words that stick out and that are going to just really bring out emotion. And then you've found your connection. The other way to work with this deck is to look at the physical objects. And so later on over the page here, it talks about the 8 amulets that are collected during a traveling woman's maturing life. These are, of course, symbolic and therefore in themselves far less important than the proud joy and growing responsibility with which they are worn by her. The beads are named for the transitional blood road through womanhood and the initiations that accompany each step of the way: girl seed, blood flower, fruit mother, spin mother, mid woman, earth crone, stone crone, bone. These beads also form a song. So with this oracle, you're able to find some really deep-rooted connection. And like I said, it could be one word that draws you in. This is a really, remember I was talking about those vows and breaking the vows and having that sort of connection. So thinking beyond imprisonment or slavery, but being actually bound to another through a contract, and thinking of slavery in quotation marks, and what does that mean? This could also kind of draw you into the story. We've got 2 Pentacles cards here, which are generally thought of as very positive pentacle cards. So there may have been, remember that this is about really embracing all of the stages of life and enjoying the journey through life. Here we have a very positive tarot card, but it does come after the Tower, and it's like, it's one of those, take a deep breath and just pause here. You are through the worst part. This is this journey has been very what I want to say, tumultuous to say the least, but know that you're heading in the right direction. So for me, in this particular reading, we'd want to look at South because we've got 2 connections to South. We want to talk about and journal about business and something about, maybe you were actually a slave. Maybe you were in the business of slave tradery. Maybe you were in the business of, keeping people keeping people as possessions. Maybe that was something that you were connected to. So there's different ways to kind of tie these cards together. But can you see how a word or a physical location or, I just find these energies work really, really well together. So let's have a look at another example, just so I can kind of illustrate what I mean. So we have the 29th card, Wolf, Udigan of the Berry Pouch, and then we have Uluru, male, female. This is something I want to speak to as well too, because it's been coming up a lot with different client readings, and that is, in our culture, coming more to the forefront is the lack of identity with gender. And even if that's not part of your life or part of your family, it's definitely, coming in more into awareness in our culture. And we have the Tower, the Emperor. Okay, so again, right, we're going to have a really kind of powerful message here. And so when this card comes up, what this means for me is really, really looking at attachment to, being masculine or being feminine, and really learning to step away from that attachment. So let's have a look at some of the keywords for this one. Let's also have a look at the energy for this particular location, because we know, for those of you that read tarot, you know what the Two of Cups means. We have some kind of, this is whatever's going on here has really shaken you up. And we need to kind of figure out what that is. And this may be a control issue, right? This may be something that you're unwilling to release. If this is about the male-female issue and you're kind of unwilling to, perhaps you have been unable to, embrace your more feminine, unable to embrace your more feminine side. Who knows? Like, there's so many possibilities here, right? We could be dealing with anything. Control is always a dangerous thing, but we do have this lovely Two of Cups here, so we'll look at that. So wolf, number 29. She walked along the forest line where the great north swept to the ground. She wore her wolfskin trousers with the fur turned inside and the hardened leather facing out. She had followed that particular wolf for half a moon until she had at last caught up to find it sick and dying in the snow. It was not the wolf she had been looking for. You see this? It was not the wolf she had been looking for. You can't make this stuff up. So long had she been traveling through that winter, through so much undefined darkness, through so many brief days rubbed raw by the ebb and flow of ice. I fear I lost you long ago, she spoke across the brittle land. Too many trees have grown to hide you from my eyes. So it kind of gives me chills when we just, you don't even have to read the whole guidebook. If you can just find this issue will magically appear. And then I just want to have a quick look at Uluru and just kind of see what the energy and message of Uluru is. Uluru is in Australia, and the energy is earth and water, creation, blood, magic, and fertility. The Anangu people are the traditional custodians of Uluru and the holders of the intricate and complex creation stories that surround this very sacred piece of geography. The many folds and fissures of the rock are not just geological features to the Anangu, but sacred places of mythos, individually holding magic and energy, and some are believed to even have creator beings still living within them. Uluru is a magnet for fertility and life. So we gain this extra bit of information about fertility. We know about not facing some aspect of yourself. And then we can look to the tarot and kind of, pull this story together. So can you see how these connections kind of build on each other? Let's just do one more. So here we have Runner, Shaman Weaver of Valleys, Troy, Health. So we have the caduceus here. So look at the symbology as well too. The Devil. Two of Pentacles. King of Swords. Look at this. This is a very, very powerful reading. And look how the caduceus here looks like the shape here, looks like the shape here. So you could also be looking to these shapes. And then we're going to look to 37 and see if there's a keyword or there is some way to tie this all together. The direction here is the east. There was once a young woman who was beloved of the heathered hills. She sped over the ground with dusk chasing at her heels. A scythe of moon rocked high above the valley, throwing scatters of thin light against the bark of trees that shivered in the breeze. Her feet sought the returning path, an ancient track that always carried travelers home. She ran it often, for the passing of her feet and the pounding of her heart kept the trail open, and her quick breath stirred away the gathered mist. She chased streams and slid through marshes and pushed through boggy grasses. The key items or the key focus points here are the heathered hills, the softfoot deer, and the dark wing ravens. The key to this reading may very well be to kind of unlock this card here. Something happened in this part of the world that deeply affected you. Your story, a story from a lifetime, may have evolved here. You may have very well been a leader. You may have done something where you had to compromise your ideals. You had to compromise your beliefs. You may also have had some connection to medicine. You may have also been a doctor. And so this is how I kind of pull the cards together, and it involves quite a long reading, and it really helps if the client is in person to do that. But if the client is not here, then it involves me going into kind of a deeper meditation and to really to bring the issue forward, to bring the pattern forward so that it can be identified and then released. I said I was going to show you a couple of other decks if you didn't have this Doreen Virtue deck. And so let me just bring these other decks out. So this is another Hay House deck that is still available. This is Carolyn Myss's deck. This is the Archetype cards. The Archetype cards are part of her Sacred Contracts program, and I don't think it was ever her intention to use this deck as a set of oracle cards. However, it does work really, really nicely. And much like the Brian Weiss and Doreen Virtue cards that I just showed you, we have lots of different archetypes, right? So we have Avenger, Gossip, Lover, Messiah, Goddess. And the beauty about this deck is that on the cards we have the more positive light attribute, and then we have a shadow attribute as well too. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of see both sides of the coin. And part of this process is really accepting and being comfortable working with the shadow attribute of the archetype, so that you can move through and move forward whatever it is you're trying to move through. So let's just do this really quick here. And these cards, of course, have a completely different color scheme, but they do work. And so I'm just gonna cards flying everywhere. These cards, it's a big pile of cards, but they do riffle shuffle. Ooh, if you can bend your hands. Okay. So let's start with the Weaver. We have the number 1 card, and we have Messiah, Cathedral of Notre Dame. Wow, that's beautiful. And doesn't that kind of speak to all of this? Okay, so we have the Knight of Swords. Sorry, my hand's in the way. We have the Lover's card, which is a really nice card to have in a past life reading. If you look at it as for, to bringing things into balance. And then we have a King and a Knight here, which if you kind of, go back to the mythology, this kind of plays out really beautifully here. And then we can bring the Messiah connection through the connection to the Notre Dame Cathedral and the energy of the area of France at that time. So this is not that old of a past life that we're looking at here. This is something more modern for sure. And then to draw in the energy of the first card here, I've read this one many times. This is a really beautiful card. Her direction is the east, and she has a very grounding element to her. So the energy of this card is very much a guardian energy, looking out over all that needs to be processed here, because this to me looks like something really deep and big that needs to be released. And this is more of an energy of protection. The other way that you might like to go with this deck, and this of course is not the only tarot deck that you could use with this kind of a reading, but I think it's really important when you choose a tarot deck that the tarot deck be as neutral and as, I'm going to use the word timeless as possible. Okay, so the other deck that I want to introduce here, let's bring this into the camera, is I was going to call it the Gene Keys deck, the Wisdom Keepers deck by Rosy Aronson. This is a really amazing deck. You could work with this deck just by itself. It has so many layers, and it's really, really powerful, especially if you are using this in connection with the work that you're doing on the Gene Keys. All right, so welcome back. This is a brand new part 2. The second part, or the final part of the video, did not record. So I have laid out the cards a little differently, and we'll just wind this up by having a look at the Wisdom Keepers Oracle and how you can work this in with a past life reading. Yeah, and as I mentioned, this deck you can work with independently. You can work with it with the Gene Keys program, and it works beautifully with a past life reading. So if you're not familiar with this deck, it's a beautifully brightly colored deck. It's just, if you like bright colors, you're going to love the images on this deck. Each of the cards has a number. So the number corresponds to a page in the guidebook. It also corresponds to a Gene Key, which is a whole other program. It's a wonderful program if you're interested in looking it up. The keywords on the card represent it's called the gift in the book. So in the Gene Keys program and in the book, each of these aspects has a shadow side, it has a positive side, and it has a more spiritual side. And so kind of the middle layer of that is what is represented in the keyword on the card, and it's referred to as the gift. So with each of these cards, we do look at the shadow as well as the gift and the siddhi. With the siddhi is more of the spiritually developed aspect of these concepts. It's a really, really beautiful program, as well as just a deck to work with. But you'll understand the deck so much better if you do all or part of the Gene Keys program. And even though this looks like a famous character, somebody that you would know in real life, Rosy has stated in her book that none of these faces are meant to be representative of any particular person. Okay, so we're going to add this deck to the mix here. And I think I'll just do one final sample here because this video's gone on far long enough. And I removed the Wisdom Keepers Oracle and decided to keep in just mass market decks for this final reading, because these are all available through Amazon or other sources for you. So we have the Ajanta Caves, which is in India. We have Farsightedness. Guide. That's really interesting. It's always interesting, isn't it? And the Moon. Some of these cards may be repeats because I did shuffle and recut the cards. So we have the Ace of Cups and the Lovers and the Moon. Let's start by referring to the guidebook, the story in the guidebook for the 17th card. My parents needed me to accomplish great things for the sake of our people. Even before school, I was quizzed and readied for intellectual excellence. Fact gathering, test taking, and structured debating were praised, while irrational emotions were discouraged. My detail-prone eyes were trained to detect flaws. My critical, opinionated mind was honed and made comparisons, always pulling out the right fact to back up my theory. My intellect served me well. As I became a good student, lawyer, and social critic, I did my research until I was certain about good, bad, right, and wrong. My opinions were always on the side of justice and became increasingly humanitarian. To everyone, I seemed unusually confident. I'm not going to read you the whole guidebook. The shadow side of this card is opinion. The gift is farsightedness, and the city is omniscience. And then here we're looking at guide. So this is pretty special. The light side of the guide is representing the nature of the divine in life and in yourself. Here we're looking at farsightedness. The Ajanta caves in India are part of an enlightenment journey. In Stacey's book, she says, I show compassion to myself and all living beings. I can be centered within chaos. All my past lives have brought me to this perfect moment of realization and wisdom. Imagine it is 1819 and you are a British soldier in India. You are out with a hunting party in the thick forest of the mountains, looking for an elusive tiger. You stumble upon the entrance to a cave, all covered with centuries of vines and trees. You cut the biggest vines aside and step into one of the most celebrated treasure troves of ancient Buddhist art ever found. The Ajanta Cave Complex was created around 1 BC by Hinayana Buddhists. They carved large spaces from a solid rock shelf above a small river. The caves included 2 large prayer halls, some living halls, and burial mounds, and accommodation for students and holy teachers. So we know by these 3 cards here that there's a deep connection to some past life in very deep spiritual holy work. And then when we look to the cards down below, now I know this one has come up before, but I find this card often comes up in past life readings, and which makes perfect sense because we do need to look to the shadow side of this card, which if you remember, I think it was opinion. And there was a lot of judgment as well too. So that's going to be an important thing to tie in. And then we have the Lover's card and the one of the Ace of Cups. So this is the beginning of really kind of tapping into emotions and that whole, we can also look at this suit that has to do with intuition as well too. The Lover's card is about making choices. So in this past life that is coming up to help you through your healing journey, we need to really focus on what the choice was you had to make as a holy person. Maybe you were a holy person, or you were in the presence of holy people, or you had a holy experience, and maybe this experience brought up some judgment or opinion on your part, and it may have caused you to shut down and to shut off yourself and to lose connection with your sacredness and with your sacred experience and with your emotions. And so it's just really beautiful how through the modality, through the medium of cards, we can kind of tap into these experiences and work with ourselves or work with clients in healing things. And if we come to it as a past life reading, what might happen right away is the whole story might kind of transmute into something that's actually occurring in this time, at this moment. And when that happens, that's really, really beautiful. So I hope this has been some help to you and you've enjoyed the different decks we've worked with. I know the readings were a little bit longer today. I really look forward to reading your comments below. And if you have any questions or you have suggestions for other decks you work with this kind of a reading, I would really like to hear from you. Also really curious that if you are familiar with any decks that you could put into the category of tarot decks that transcend time and culture. So they don't really speak to a particular era or they don't speak to a particular people. I would really appreciate hearing that from you as well. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Stay well, my friends. Namaste.